James Nicholson, UK, 16th of August, 1940. On August 16th, 1940, over the skies of southern England, Flight Lieutenant James Nicholson found himself in a life or death struggle that would etch his name into the annals of history. The Battle of Britain was raging, and RAF pilots were fighting desperately to keep the Luftwaffe at bay. Nicholson, flying a Hawker Hurricane with number 249 Squadron, was on a routine patrol when he spotted an enemy formation. What happened next would earn him the Victoria Cross, the highest award for gallantry in the British Commonwealth, and he remains the only fighter pilot of World War II to receive it. At 17,000 feet over Southampton, Nicholson's squadron intercepted a group of Messerschmitt Bf-110s. Engaging in a dogfight, Nicholson's Hurricane was suddenly riddled with cannon shells from an unseen Bf-109. Bullets and shrapnel tore into the cockpit and flames erupted as fuel lines ignited. His left eye was injured, his leg was burned, and his aircraft was mortally wounded. The standard procedure in such situations? Bail out immediately. But as Nicholson prepared to jump, he spotted another Bf-110 in his sights. His fighter was already a burning wreck, but the adrenaline and sheer combat instinct took over. He pressed the attack. Instead of abandoning ship, he gritted his teeth, shoved the throttle forward and opened fire. His guns ripped into the enemy aircraft, sending it spiraling toward the ground. By this point, flames were engulfing his cockpit, searing his hands and face. He had no choice but to bail out. As he tumbled through the air, pain shot through his body, his flight suit still smoldering. When he landed, a new threat appeared. Trigger-happy members of the Home Guard mistook him for a German pilot and nearly shot him. It was only after hurriedly identifying himself as RAF that he was taken to a hospital for treatment. For his extraordinary bravery, Nicholson was awarded the Victoria Cross on November 15th, 1940. Fighter pilots were typically not awarded the VC, as their engagements were brief, chaotic, and difficult to document compared to the actions of bomber crews or infantrymen. His citation recognized his conspicuous gallantry and disregard for his own life, as he had chosen to continue the fight instead of saving himself. Prime Minister Winston Churchill personally took note of Nicholson's actions, and the award was widely publicized, boosting RAF morale during the darkest days of the war. Nicholson became a symbol of the fighting spirit of the few, the RAF pilots who turned the tide of the Battle of Britain. Despite his injuries, Nicholson returned to flying. He later served in India and Burma, continuing to fight with the RAF. Sadly, his luck ran out in 1945. On May the 2nd, while acting as an observer in a B-24 Liberator bomber, the aircraft suffered engine failure and crashed into the Bay of Bengal. There were no survivors. James Nicholson was just 28 years old. Nicholson's Victoria Cross is now displayed at the RAF Museum in London, a lasting testament to his courage. His name is honoured among the heroes of the Battle of Britain, and his story remains one of the most remarkable acts of aerial heroism in British history. The fact that no other British fighter pilot received a Victoria Cross in World War II speaks to how exceptional his actions were. Nicholson's decision to continue fighting while his aircraft burned around him wasn't just bravery, it was the kind of reckless determination that defined the RAF during Britain's finest hour. Would you have had the nerve to keep on fighting while your plane was on fire? James Nicholson did, and that's why he remains one of the greatest fighter pilots of World War II. Witold Urbanowicz, Poland, September 1940. By September 1940, the fate of Britain, and arguably the entire war, hung in the balance. The Battle of Britain was raging, and the Luftwaffe was throwing everything it had at the Royal Air Force, seeking to dominate the skies before launching an invasion. The RAF was outnumbered, stretched to its limits, and desperately needed skilled pilots to hold the line. Enter Witold Urbanowicz, a Polish fighter ace who had fled Nazi-occupied Poland to continue the fight. By the time September rolled around, Urbanowicz had become a key leader in number 303 Squadron, the most effective unit of the entire Battle of Britain. Flying the Hawker Hurricane, he and his fellow Polish pilots would change the course of history, bringing down more enemy aircraft than any other RAF squadron and proving that Poland was far from defeated. Born in 1910 in Olszanka, Poland, Urbanowicz had always been drawn to the skies. He joined the Polish Air Force in the 1930s, where he quickly proved himself to be a natural fighter pilot with sharp instincts and fearless aggression. But when Germany invaded Poland in September of 1939, the Polish Air Force was outnumbered and outgunned. Despite this, Polish pilots fought with incredible bravery even as their country was overrun. Rather than surrender, many, including Urbanowicz, escaped to continue the fight elsewhere. After an arduous journey through Romania and France, he made his way to Britain, where he joined the Royal Air Force, determined to exact revenge on the Luftwaffe. And he did exactly that. When Urbanowicz arrived in Britain, the RAF was initially skeptical of the Polish pilots. Many British commanders doubted whether foreigners could integrate effectively, and there was a language barrier to contend with as well. But those doubts vanished the moment a 303 squadron took to the skies. Equipped with Hawker Hurricanes, the Poles showed a level of aggression, skill and precision that stunned their British counterparts. Unlike British-trained pilots, who tended to play defensively, Polish aviators like Urbanowicz went straight for the kill, engaging German bombers and fighters with ferocity and pinpoint marksmanship. In just a few weeks, 303 Squadron outperformed every other unit in the RAF, racking up more kills than any other squadron during the Battle of Britain. And at the heart of this was Witold Urbanowicz, who quickly rose to command the squadron, leading from the front and personally shooting down 17 German aircraft. The most intense phase of the Battle of Britain came in September 1940, when the Luftwaffe launched its largest raids on London and southern England. Hitler was growing impatient and ordered relentless waves of bombers and escort fighters to break the RAF's resistance. It was during this period that Urbanowicz cemented his place as a legend. Flying daily sorties, he hunted down enemy bombers and fighters, often engaging in dogfights against multiple opponents. On some days, he would score multiple kills in a single mission, tearing through the Luftwaffe's formations and keeping Britain safe from invasion. By the end of the battle, he had personally downed 17 aircraft, making him one of the top-scoring aces of the campaign. But his success wasn't just about personal victories, it was about leadership. Under his command, 303 Squadron became the most effective unit in the entire RAF, destroying 126 enemy aircraft in just over a month. It was an extraordinary achievement, considering that Polish pilots made up only a small fraction of the RAF's fighter strength. After the Battle of Britain, Urbanowicz continued fighting, flying later in Burma against the Japanese, where he once again proved his adaptability and skill as a combat pilot. By the end of the war, he had fought in both Europe and the Pacific, making him one of the few Allied pilots to do so. Despite his incredible service, his return to Poland after the war was impossible. With the Soviet-backed communist regime now in control, Polish war heroes like Urbanowicz were seen as a threat. Rather than risk imprisonment, he chose to remain in exile, eventually settling in the United States, where he lived until his death in 1996. It was a tragic fate shared by many Polish war heroes. They'd given everything for their country, yet they could never return home. The Battle of Britain was one of the most pivotal moments of World War II. Without victory in the air, Britain would have fallen and the course of history would have been very different. And yet, the RAF's triumph would not have been possible without the bravery, skill, and sacrifice of Polish pilots, amongst others, led by men like Witold Urbanowicz. When the war began, Poland had been conquered, but through their actions in the skies, Polish pilots proved their nation was never truly defeated. They fought not just for Britain, but for Poland's honor, for revenge, and for the freedom they'd been robbed of. Would Britain have survived without the Polish heroes of 303 Squadron? Maybe. But it would have been a much, much harder fight. Clive Caldwell, Australia, December 1941. By December 1941, war had spread across the globe, and the North African campaign was in full swing. In the skies over the vast deserts, the Royal Air Force and its Commonwealth allies were locked in a deadly struggle against the German Luftwaffe and the Italian Regia Aeronautica. It was in this unforgiving theatre that Clive Caldwell, an Australian fighter pilot with an aggressive and fearless style, carved his name into history. As Australia's highest scoring ace of World War II, Caldwell proved that skill, precision, and a little bit of ruthlessness could turn the tide of battle in the air. And in December 1941, he put that skill to devastating use, engaging multiple enemy aircraft and securing several victories in a single day. Clive Caldwell was born in 1920 in Sydney, Australia, and unlike many fighter pilots, he wasn't naturally drawn to aviation. In fact, he was considered a late bloomer, only joining the Royal Australian Air Force in 1940 when war was already raging. During his training, he showed impressive natural talent, but was also known for his independent streak. His instructors noted that he had a unique instinct for aerial combat, and when he was sent to fight in North Africa with 250 Squadron RAF, he quickly proved them right. By December 1941, the Desert Air Force was engaged in a brutal struggle for air superiority. The British-led forces were trying to push back Rommel's Afrika Korps, and control of the skies was crucial to success on the ground. Flying the Curtiss P-40 Tomahawk, Caldwell had already built up a reputation for being a deadly pilot. Unlike many of his British counterparts, who preferred disciplined formations, Caldwell favoured a more aggressive, high-risk style. He would close in on his targets, making sure his machine guns were devastatingly accurate before firing. On one particular day in December 1941, Caldwell and his squadron intercepted a formation of German and Italian aircraft over the Libyan desert. The engagement quickly turned into a chaotic, swirling dogfight. Caldwell, despite being outnumbered, dove straight into the fight, taking down multiple enemy aircraft in a matter of minutes. His P-40 tore through the formation, its 50 caliber machine guns shredding enemy planes at close range. By the end of the engagement, Caldwell had personally shot down 5 enemy aircraft, securing himself as an ace in a single day. But that wasn't what made him legendary. Caldwell's ability to kill efficiently in air combat was unparalleled. He developed a technique he called shadow shooting, practicing marksmanship by firing at his own shadow on the desert floor. This method made his aim deadly accurate, allowing him to waste no ammunition in combat. But what made him truly feared was his willingness to engage and destroy regardless of the odds. He even managed to shoot down a German aircraft while his own cockpit was filled with oil, leaving him effectively blind. In one engagement, he was outnumbered by a squadron of German fighters. Instead of retreating, he stayed and fought, managing to damage multiple enemy aircraft before escaping with just a few rounds of ammunition left. His fearless combat style earned him the nickname Killer. Caldwell continued his streak of victories throughout 1942 and 1943, eventually scoring roughly 28 confirmed kills, making him Australia's top fighter ace of World War II. He was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross and Distinguished Service Order for his relentless success in combat. His reputation as a leader and strategist led to his promotion, and he was later assigned to train new pilots, passing on the deadly skills that made him such a force in the air. Unlike many top aces, Caldwell survived the war, though not without controversy. Later in his career, he was involved in a mutiny within the Royal Australian Air Force, protesting against the use of Australian pilots in what they saw as unnecessary and poorly planned missions. Though this tarnished his relationship with military leadership, his record in combat remained untouchable. After the war, Caldwell retired from aviation and lived a quiet life in Australia, passing away in 1994. Clive Caldwell wasn't just Australia's top ace. He was a fearless warrior who took the fight to the enemy in one of the harshest combat environments of World War II. His aggressive tactics, incredible aim, and sheer determination made him one of the most respected pilots of the Desert Air Force. Would you have had the nerve to dive headfirst into a swarm of enemy aircraft? Knowing you were definitively outnumbered, Clive Caldwell did, and that's why he became a legend. Saburō Sakai, Imperial Japanese Navy, 7th of August 1942. On the 7th of August 1942, over the skies of Guadalcanal, one of Japan's most skilled fighter pilots, Saburō Sakai, was in the fight of his life. Flying his Mitsubishi A6M0, he had already scored numerous victories throughout the Pacific War, earning a reputation as one of Japan's deadliest aces. But on this day, a fierce battle with American aircraft would leave him horribly wounded, half-blind, and on the verge of death. Yet, instead of giving up, he did the impossible, flying over 1,000 kilometers or 600 miles back to his base while losing blood, partially paralyzed, and barely conscious. It was a feat that defied all logic, proving that sheer willpower could overcome even the worst odds. Saburō Sakai was born in 1916 in Saga, Japan, to a poor samurai family. His upbringing was strict and disciplined, teaching him the values of honor, duty, and perseverance. Though he struggled in school, he found his calling in the military, joining the Imperial Japanese Navy Air Service in 1937. From the moment he took to the skies, it was clear that Sakai had exceptional natural talent. During the early days of World War II, as Japan swept across the Pacific, he became one of the top aces in the Imperial Japanese Navy, racking up dozens of kills against American, Dutch, and British aircraft. Flying the legendary Zero, Sakai's style was aggressive, precise, and relentless. His marksmanship was deadly, and his ability to maneuver in combat made him a near unbeatable opponent. By mid-1942, he had already established himself as a leading ace, feared by any pilot who crossed his path. But even the best pilots have their limits, and on August 7th, 1942, his limits would be tested in a way no one had ever seen before. Early that morning, Sakai's Tainan Air Group thundered out of Rabaul to smash the US carrier strikes covering the first marine landings on Guadalcanal. After dropping a lone Grumman F-4F Wildcat in a tight dogfight, Sakai spotted 8 SBD Dauntless dive bombers from USS Enterprise circling near Tulagi. Their stubby wings and broad tails looked, at a glance, like the slower, more vulnerable TBF Avenger torpedo bombers. An easy score, or so it seemed. But as he closed to point-blank range, he realized his error. At that moment, the Dauntless's rear gunners swung their twin .30 caliber rear turrets straight at him. A burst of tracers shredded the canopy. One round creased the top of his skull, shattered his goggles, blinded his right eye, and half paralyzed his face and left arm. Blood flooded his remaining vision. The Zero flipped inverted and plunged earthward. For almost anyone else, that was the end. Sakai, half blind, half numb, struggling to stay conscious, clawed the fighter into level flight just above the waves and took stock. No friendlies in sight, a crippled body, and roughly 560 nautical miles of open ocean between him and Rabaul. With half of his face shattered, blind in one eye, and paralyzed on one side, Sakai did the unthinkable. He turned his crippled Zero and began the long flight home. He couldn't read his instruments because of the blood in his remaining eye. He couldn't move his left arm. He could barely hold the stick. Yet, somehow, he kept flying. For hours, he fought against shock, blood loss, and exhaustion, using only the sensation of wind on his face to keep himself oriented. Every few minutes, he would jab his leg with a screwdriver to stay awake, because if he blacked out, he was dead. At one point, he considered crashing his Zero into an American warship in a final act of defiance, but he shook the thought away. He was going to survive. After a miraculous 4-hour journey, his home base at Rabaul finally came into view. Barely able to land, he brought his aircraft down safely, ending one of the most unbelievable survival stories in aviation history. Doctors were stunned that he was still alive. They wanted to send him back to Japan for recovery, but Sakai refused. He wanted to keep fighting. Despite losing vision in one eye, he continued flying combat missions until 1944, when the tide of the war turned against Japan. After the war, he underwent multiple surgeries, regaining partial sight in his wounded eye. He later became a vocal advocate for peace, meeting former American pilots and even befriending some of the men who had once been his enemies. Saburō Sakai's legendary flight on August 7, 1942 remains one of the greatest survival stories in aviation history. While many pilots were remembered for their kills, Sakai was remembered for his will to live, for his ability to overcome pain, shock, and the impossible odds stacked against him. He passed away in 2000, but his story still inspires pilots, soldiers, and historians around the world. It wasn't just his skill that made him a legend, it was his refusal to surrender to anything. Would you have been able to stay conscious after a bullet tore through your skull? Buzz Beurling, Canada, October 1942. By October 1942, the tiny island of Malta was one of the most heavily bombed places on planet Earth. The Axis powers, Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy, were determined to bomb and starve it into submission, knowing its strategic location was a thorn in their side. The island's defenders were outnumbered, exhausted, and fighting for survival. But among them was one man who refused to back down, a Canadian fighter pilot named George Buzz Beurling. Nicknamed the Falcon of Malta, Beurling was a lone wolf, a natural killer in the sky, and one of the deadliest marksmen of World War II. In just a few weeks over Malta, he racked up 27 confirmed kills, taking on overwhelming numbers and proving that skill could still triumph over brute force. Born in 1921 in Verdun, Quebec, Beurling was obsessed with flying from a young age. But he wasn't your typical fighter pilot. He wasn't disciplined, he didn't follow orders well, and he had little interest in teamwork. He was a pure hunter, a man who lived to be in the air and didn't care much for military structure or tradition. When World War II broke out, Beurling struggled to find his place. The Royal Canadian Air Force rejected him due to his lack of formal education, so he made his way to England, where he eventually joined the Royal Air Force. It wasn't until he was posted to Malta in 1942 that he finally got the chance to show what he could do. By mid-1942, Malta was under constant siege. The Luftwaffe and Regia Aeronautica bombed it daily, hoping to wipe out its airfields and defenses. The pilots defending the island were badly outnumbered, flying Spitfires against waves of German and Italian bombers and fighters. For Beurling, this was the perfect hunting ground. Unlike most pilots who relied on formation flying and teamwork, Beurling preferred to operate alone, using the sky as his personal battlefield. His marksmanship was second to none. He had an uncanny ability to hit enemy aircraft with minimal ammunition, often waiting until he was within 100 meters before firing, ensuring a kill with every burst. In October of 1942, Beurling's skill reached its peak. In just 14 days, he shot down an astonishing 27 aircraft, including German Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Italian Macchi C-202 fighters. His tactics were deadly simple. He stayed high, using altitude to dive into enemy formations, he aimed for the cockpit or engine, ensuring maximum damage, and he broke off immediately after a kill, avoiding unnecessary risks. His precision was legendary. One Italian pilot who survived being shot down by Beurling later said, "I never even saw him. One moment I was flying, the next, my plane was on fire." Beurling's success wasn't just about skill. He had an instinct for aerial combat that set him apart from everybody else. He had a mathematical mind, calculating bullet trajectories and enemy movement with pinpoint accuracy. But he was also reckless. He refused to follow orders, often abandoning formation to chase kills. His commanding officers admired his skills, but found him impossible to control. Despite this, he became the top ace of the Malta campaign, his kill count rising so fast that the British used him as a propaganda tool, showcasing him as the perfect fighter pilot. Beurling's luck almost ran out multiple times though. On one mission, his Spitfire was riddled with bullets and he barely made it back to base, wounded but still alive. Another time, he was shot down and had to parachute into the sea, where he was rescued by the Royal Navy. But the most brutal moment came in October 1942 when he was hit by cannon fire from a German fighter. He suffered serious wounds, including shrapnel in his arms and legs, but he still managed to land his damaged planes safely. His injuries ended his time in Malta, but by then, he had cemented his legacy as one of the deadliest aces of the war. After recovering from his wounds, Beurling was transferred to Canada, where he struggled to adapt to peacetime. He thus attempted to join the Israeli Air Force during its war for independence. In 1948, before he could begin combat operations for Israel, he was killed in a mysterious plane crash in Rome. The cause of the crash remains controversial, with some suspecting sabotage, though no proof has ever surfaced. Buzz Beurling wasn't just another ace, he was a phenomenon. His 27 kills over Malta were achieved through pure skill, instinct, and an almost unnatural ability to predict his enemy's movements. He wasn't a team player, he wasn't a leader, he was a hunter, a pilot who lived for combat and thrived on the thrill of the kill. Alexander Pokryshkin, USSR, March 1943. In the spring of 1943, the skies over the Kuban bridgehead were a battleground. The Soviet Air Force and the Luftwaffe were locked in a brutal fight for dominance over southern Russia, and for years, the Germans had held the upper hand. Their pilots were well trained, their tactics refined, and their aircraft deadly. But in March 1943, one Soviet pilot was about to change everything. Alexander Pokryshkin, already an ace and rising star in the 16th Guards Fighter Aviation Regiment, took to the air and put his radical new air combat doctrine to the test. In a series of dogfights over Kuban, he would personally shoot down multiple German aircraft and reshape the very way the Soviet Union fought in the skies. This wasn't just another pilot scoring kills, this was the beginning of a revolution in Soviet air warfare. Born in 1913 in Novosibirsk, Pokryshkin had been fascinated with aviation since childhood. He was methodical, analytical, and above all, determined. When he joined the Soviet Air Force in the 1930s, he quickly proved himself as a gifted pilot, but his real strength lay in his ability to think beyond existing doctrine. At the start of the war, the Soviet Air Force was struggling. The Luftwaffe, filled with battle-hardened aces, routinely outmaneuvered and outgunned Soviet pilots. The Soviet command structure emphasized rigid, outdated tactics, formation flying that left pilots predictable and vulnerable. Losses were catastrophic, and many promising young pilots never lived long enough to gain experience. Pokryshkin saw the flaws immediately. If the Soviet Air Force wanted to survive, let alone win, it needed a complete tactical overhaul. And he was about to prove exactly how that should be done. In March 1943, as the Red Army pushed toward Kuban, Pokryshkin took part in some of the fiercest aerial battles of the war. The Luftwaffe was attempting to secure air superiority, launching waves of Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Junkers Ju-87 Stukas against Soviet ground forces. Pokryshkin, flying an American-supplied Bell P-39 era Cobra, led his squadron into the fight, but not in the way Soviet pilots had been trained. Instead of following standard Soviet doctrine of tight formation and defensive flying, he introduced a more dynamic, aggressive approach. His tactics emphasized speed, surprise, and precision attacks. He struck fast, hit hard, and immediately disengaged before the enemy could react. As the Luftwaffe swarmed into the battlefield, Pokryshkin positioned himself above the fight. He waited for the perfect moment, then dove from the sky at blistering speed, guns blazing. The first German aircraft exploded in a fireball, then another, and another. By the end of the engagement, Pokryshkin had personally shot down multiple German planes, and his squadron had torn through the Luftwaffe's formations with a devastating effect. The Germans, caught off guard by the new Soviet tactics, were forced to retreat. For the first time, the Luftwaffe had encountered a Soviet unit that wasn't just surviving, but dominating the fight. What Pokryshkin demonstrated in Kuban became the foundation of modern Soviet aerial combat. He called this strategy attack from above, hit and run. Instead of engaging in long, drawn-out dogfights that burned fuel and exposed pilots to counterattacks, Pokryshkin's method relied on gaining altitude for superior positioning, diving at high speed to surprise the enemy, firing only when a kill was guaranteed, immediately escaping before enemy fighters could respond. This approach not only increased Soviet victory rates, but also saved pilots' lives, ensuring that experienced airmen could return to battle instead of being lost in unnecessary, prolonged engagements. His success in Kuban forced the entire Soviet Air Force to rethink its approach to air combat. Soon, his doctrine was being taught to new generations of Soviet pilots, and the Red Air Force, once on the verge of collapse, began pushing the Luftwaffe out of the skies. By the end of the war, Pokryshkin had 59 confirmed kills, making him one of the Soviet Union's most successful fighter aces. But his true legacy wasn't in his kill count, it was in the way he transformed Soviet aviation forever. For his bravery, leadership, and tactical brilliance, Pokryshkin was awarded the Hero of the Soviet Union 3 times, one of only a handful of people in history to receive such an honor. After the war, he continued to serve in the Soviet Air Force, training future generations of pilots using his own revolutionary methods. Pokryshkin didn't just fight for survival, he fought to change the game, and he won. In the end, although being an ace is very impressive, rewriting the way wars are fought is next level. James Swett, USA, 7th of April 1943. On the 7th of April 1943, over the Solomon Islands, a young Marine Corps aviator named James Swett climbed into his Grumman F-4F Wildcat for what would become one of the most legendary dogfights of World War II. That day, in his very first combat mission, Swett took on an entire squadron of Japanese dive bombers alone and shot down 7 of them in a single sortie. And he did it while wounded. This incredible display of skill and bravery earned him the Medal of Honor and solidified his place among the greatest fighter pilots in Marine Corps history. The Japanese were launching a major air attack on American forces near Guadalcanal, sending waves of Aichi D-3A Val dive bombers to destroy US positions. The US Marines scrambled their fighters to intercept, including James Swett, a 22-year-old second lieutenant flying his very first combat sortie. As soon as he reached 10,000 feet, Swett found himself outnumbered. Dozens of enemy dive bombers were swarming in. Instead of waiting for reinforcements, he dove straight into the formation, targeting the lead bombers before they could reach their targets. One by one, he picked them off. His first kill went down in flames, then the second, third, and fourth. Each time he lined up a target, he held his fire until he was dangerously close, ensuring his rounds hit dead center. The Japanese pilots, now realizing they were under attack, turned their guns on him. His Wildcat was hit, bullets shattered his windshield, and shrapnel tore into his head. Blood was now streaming down his face. But Swett didn't back off. Despite his injuries, he kept pressing the attack, downing 3 more enemy planes before his Wildcat was critically damaged. With his aircraft leaking fuel and oil, he was forced to crash land into the ocean. Floating in the water, Swett was eventually rescued by American forces. His first combat mission had ended with 7 enemy planes destroyed. For his extraordinary bravery and skill, James Swett was awarded the Medal of Honor, the highest US military decoration. But his war wasn't over. Swett went on to become one of the top Marine aces of World War II, racking up a total of 15.5 aerial victories over the Pacific. He flew multiple combat tours, surviving being shot down multiple times, and continued to engage the enemy with the same fearless determination he showed on that first mission. After the war, Swett stayed in aviation, flying both military and civilian aircraft. Despite the horrors of war, he was known for his modesty, rarely boasting about his achievements, even though his 7-kill mission remains one of the greatest single-day performances in aviation history. He passed away in 2009 but his name lives on as one of the greatest Marine Corps fighter pilots of all time. Very few pilots ever achieve A status, 5 kills, in their entire careers. James Swett did it in a single mission, on his first day in combat. Lydia Litvyak, USSR, 1st of August 1943. On the 1st of August 1943, high above the Eastern Front, Lydia Litvyak was fighting her last battle. She was outnumbered, outgunned, and dangerously low on fuel. But she refused to retreat. She had already scored multiple victories that day, and she wasn't about to back down now. As enemy fighters swarmed around her, she continued to fight, her Yak-1 twisting and turning through the sky, dodging enemy fire. Then, a burst of gunfire struck her aircraft. She was going down. But Lydia Litvyak was no ordinary fighter pilot. She was the first female ace in history, a woman who had shattered expectations, taken on the best of the Luftwaffe, and become a legend in Soviet aviation. Even in death, her story would inspire generations. Litvyak was born in Moscow in 1921 and fell in love with flying at a young age. By the time she was 15, she'd already enrolled in an aviation club, and by 17, she was a fully trained pilot instructing others how to fly. When Germany invaded the Soviet Union in 1941, Litvyak volunteered immediately. At first, the Soviet Air Force refused to send women into combat, but that changed as the war intensified. Women were soon recruited into elite all-female units, including the famous 588th Night Bomber Regiment, the Night Witches. But Litvyak wasn't satisfied flying bombers. She wanted to fight. She wanted to be a fighter pilot. Her persistence paid off. She was assigned to the 586th Fighter Aviation Regiment, flying the Yakovlev Yak-1, one of the Soviet Union's most capable fighter aircraft. It wasn't long before she proved she belonged. Litvak's first taste of air combat came in 1942 over Stalingrad, where she quickly earned a reputation as a deadly and fearless pilot. On September 13th, 1942, she claimed her first 2 kills, taking down a Junkers Ju-88 bomber and a Messerschmitt Bf-109 fighter. It was a historic moment. She became the first woman to shoot down an enemy aircraft in combat. Her victories didn't stop there. She hunted German aces, engaged in furious dogfights, and took on multiple enemy aircraft at once. Soon, she'd racked up enough victories to become an ace, something that no female pilot had ever achieved. But her success made her a target. The Luftwaffe began to recognize her white-painted Yak-1 and feared her skill in combat. They called her the White Rose of Stalingrad, a name that would live on far beyond the war. By the summer of 1943, Litvyak had already survived multiple injuries and crash landings, but she refused to stop fighting. She had scored at least 12 solo kills and several shared victories, making her one of the deadliest pilots in her regiment. On August 1st, 1943, she took off on what would be her final mission. She was escorting Soviet bombers near Orel when German fighters launched a heavy counterattack. Outnumbered and low on fuel, Litvyak fought furiously, taking down multiple enemy planes while protecting the bombers. But then, disaster struck. A group of German Messerschmitts swarmed her and a burst of gunfire ripped through her Yak-1. She was hit. Her plane began to spiral. Her comrades watched in horror as her aircraft disappeared into the clouds. She never returned. For years, her fate was unknown. The Soviets listed her as missing in action, and some believed she may have been captured by the Germans. But there was no proof, only rumors. It wasn't until 1979, decades after the war ended, that her remains were found in an unmarked grave, confirming that she had died in battle. Lydia Litvyak wasn't just a skilled pilot. She was a symbol of determination, courage, and breaking barriers. She had to fight for her place in the air, and when she got it, she became one of the best fighter pilots of the war. For her bravery, she was posthumously awarded the Hero of the Soviet Union in 1990. Today, she remains one of the most legendary female fighter pilots in history. Ilmari Juutilainen, Finland, 1944. By 1944, World War II had engulfed Europe, but in the frozen north, Finland was fighting a war of survival. Trapped between the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany, the Finnish Air Force was outnumbered and outgunned. Yet, despite these impossible odds, Finland produced one of the greatest fighter aces of all time, a man who would go on to achieve 94 confirmed aerial victories without ever being shot down. His name was Aino Ilmari Juutilainen, and he was Finland's deadliest warrior in the sky. Ilmari Juutilainen was born in 1914 in Lieska, Finland, and like many great pilots, he discovered his love for flying at a young age. When Finland entered World War II, Juutilainen joined the Finnish Air Force, flying first in the Winter War against the Soviet Union and later in the Continuation War. At first, Finland's situation seemed hopeless. The Soviet Air Force was one of the largest in the world, fielding thousands of aircraft against Finland's small but skilled fighter units. The Finnish Air Force had to rely on tactical superiority, hit-and-run attacks, and the skill of individual pilots to survive. And no one mastered these tactics better than Juutilainen. Unlike the flashy aces of the Luftwaffe or the strategic commanders of the RAF, Juutilainen was a cold, methodical killer in the cockpit. He didn't take unnecessary risks, didn't fall for traps, and never let his emotions get the better of him. He studied the enemy, learning their weaknesses and perfecting the art of the ambush. His aircraft choice? The Brewster Buffalo and later the Bf-109G, a fighter that he used with deadly efficiency against waves of Soviet aircraft. His flying style was sharp, precise, and fearless. Instead of chasing after glory or reckless dogfights, Juutilainen focused on high percentage kills, waiting for the perfect moment to strike and then eliminating his target in a single, calculated burst. By the time 1944 arrived, his kill count already soared past 80 victories, and Finland was facing a renewed Soviet onslaught. As the war neared its climax, the Soviets launched a massive summer offensive against Finland, hoping to crush Finnish resistance once and for all. The skies were filled with waves of Soviet bombers and fighters, and the Finnish Air Force was once again outnumbered and outgunned. Juutilainen, now a seasoned ace with near mythical status, went on a killing spree. Using his experience, superior marksmanship, and the maneuverability of his Bf-109G, he racked up victory after victory. By the time Finland signed a separate peace agreement with the Soviet Union in late 1944, Juutilainen had amassed a staggering 94 confirmed kills, a record that made him the highest scoring non-German ace of all time. More astonishingly, he was never shot down, not once. Even when his aircraft was hit, he always managed to bring it home safely, proving his survival instincts were just as sharp as his shooting skills. So what made Juutilainen so untouchable? It wasn't just his flying skill, it was his mentality. He never took unnecessary risks. While other pilots pushed their luck, Juutilainen only engaged when he had a clear advantage. He had pinpoint accuracy. Many pilots needed multiple bursts to take down a plane. Juutilainen only needed 1 or 2 shots to cripple his target. He was a master of situational awareness. He never got trapped in extended dogfights. Instead, he always kept an exit strategy, ensuring he could escape if things turned against him. His strategy wasn't about reckless heroism, it was about winning, surviving, and killing with absolute efficiency. Unlike some of the more celebrated aces of the war, Juutilainen was quiet, reserved, and humble. He never boasted about his victories, and he wasn't interested in personal fame. After the war, he refused offers to fly for other air forces, instead choosing to live a peaceful life in Finland. He later wrote a memoir, Double Fighter Night, detailing his experiences, but never sought the spotlight. Even in retirement, he remained a hero to the Finnish people, a symbol of determination, skill, and national pride. Ilmari Juutilainen's 94 kills place him among the greatest fighter pilots in history, but it's not just the numbers that make him legendary. It's how he did it. He never let himself be shot down, he never let his emotions cloud his judgment, and he never lost control of the fight. Juutilainen was the epitome of discipline. Erich Hartmann, Germany, May 1944. By May 1944, the Eastern Front was a sky filled with fire and destruction. The Soviet Air Force, growing stronger every day, was throwing wave after wave of aircraft into the fight against the Luftwaffe. But in the middle of the chaos, one pilot stood out above all others, Erich Hartmann. With incredible precision, discipline, and a near unmatched ability to survive, Hartmann had already racked up an astonishing 300 plus aerial victories. But that spring, he continued his relentless reign in the skies, engaging and destroying multiple Soviet fighters in a single mission. By the time the war ended, he had 352 confirmed kills, making him the highest scoring fighter ace in history, a record that still stands today. Born in 1922, Hartmann was drawn to aviation at a young age. He trained as a glider pilot before joining the Luftwaffe in 1940, where he showed early promise but struggled with discipline. His instructors recognized his talent though, and by 1942, he was assigned to the Jagdgeschwader 52, an elite wing on the Eastern Front. Hartmann quickly learned that survival in the air war over Russia required more than just skill. It required strategy, patience, and a near-perfect understanding of aerial combat. Unlike many German aces who relied on maneuvering skills and extended dogfights, Hartmann mastered the art of the ambush. He developed a deadly close-range kill tactic in which he would use the sun or cloud cover to conceal his approach, get in extremely close, sometimes within 100 meters of his target, fire a single, precise burst at the enemy's engine or cockpit, break away instantly before the enemy wingman could react. This method was risky, but it was devastatingly effective. It minimized the amount of time he spent exposed to counterfire and almost guaranteed a kill every time he fired his guns. His precision and fearlessness soon earned him a chilling reputation among Soviet pilots. They called him the Black Devil because of the black tulip painted on the nose of his Messerschmitt Bf 109. The mere sight of his aircraft sent fear through enemy squadrons, and some Soviet pilots were even known to flee rather than engage him in combat. By May 1944, the war was turning against Germany. The Soviet Air Force was growing stronger, and the Luftwaffe was being stretched thin across multiple fronts. But Hartmann and Jagdgeschwader 52 dominated the skies, continuing to rack up victories. During one of his patrols that spring, Hartmann and his wingmen encountered a large group of Soviet Yak-9 fighters. They were outnumbered, but Hartmann was never one to shy away from a fight. As the enemy formation came into range, Hartmann climbed above them, using the sun to mask his approach. Then, in a flash, he dived straight through their formation, firing at point-blank range. One Yak-9 exploded immediately, engine bursting into flames. Hartmann didn't stop. He looped back up, repositioned, and struck again. Another Soviet fighter spiraled down. The Soviet pilots, now in full defensive mode, scattered. Hartmann pursued his next target, closing the distance and delivering a single deadly burst to its fuselage. 3 kills in minutes. By the time the engagement was over, he had downed several Soviet aircraft. Just another mission in a career filled with victories. Hartmann's ability to consistently outthink, outshoot, and outmaneuver his opponents propelled him into history. By the summer of 1944, he had surpassed 300 victories, and by the end of the war, his tally reached a staggering 352 confirmed kills, a record that no other fighter pilot has ever matched. For his achievements, he was awarded the Knight's Cross with oak leaves, swords and diamonds, Germany's highest military honor. Yet, despite his reputation as the most lethal ace of all time, Hartmann was never shot down in combat. Every time his aircraft was damaged, it was either due to mechanical failure or ground fire. but no enemy pilot ever bested him in the air. When Germany surrendered in May 1945, Hartmann refused to abandon his men. Rather than fleeing west, he surrendered to the Soviet army, believing he would be treated as a prisoner of war. Instead, he was accused of war crimes he didn't commit and sentenced to 10 years in a Soviet labor camp. For nearly a decade, he endured harsh conditions, brutal interrogations, and forced labor. Yet, he never broke. Finally, in 1955, after negotiations between the Soviet Union and West Germany, Hartmann was released. He returned home and rejoined the German Air Force, where he helped shape the post-war Luftwaffe, training a new generation of fighter pilots. Hartmann retired from the military in 1970, having secured his place in history as the highest-scoring ace of all time. No pilot, German, American, Soviet, or British, has ever come close to matching his 352 kills. His success wasn't just about skill, it was about his tactical brilliance, precision, and discipline. He didn't just survive the war, he mastered it. Captain Richard Ira Bong was already a legend. With 40 confirmed aerial victories, he was the United States' highest-scoring fighter ace of World War II, a record that still stands to this day. Flying his P-38 Lightning, Bong had become a nightmare for Japanese pilots, displaying unmatched skill, coolness under pressure, and a relentless drive to protect his fellow airmen. But despite his already staggering tally, Bong continued to put himself in harm's way. That day, over Leyte Gulf, he engaged wave after wave of enemy aircraft, proving once again why he was America's greatest fighter pilot. Born in Wisconsin in 1920, Bong had an obsession with flight from a young age. He joined the US Army Air Forces in 1941, just in time for America's entry into World War II. When he transitioned to the Lockheed P-38 Lightning, he found his perfect match. The twin-engine fighter was fast, heavily armed, and deadly in the right hands. Bong's hands. His first kills came in December 1942, and by mid-1943, his reputation was growing fast. Unlike many pilots who prioritized personal safety, Bong had an aggressive, almost reckless style. He got dangerously close to his targets, making sure his 50 caliber machine guns and 20mm cannon shredded the enemy before breaking off. This was high risk, high reward combat, and Bong thrived in it. By April 1944, he had surpassed Eddie Rickenbacker's World War I record of 26 kills, becoming America's top ace. By late 1944, the war in the Pacific was reaching a turning point. The Philippines campaign was about to begin, and the Leyte Gulf, site of the largest naval battle in history, was crawling with Japanese aircraft determined to halt the US invasion. Sometime in October, Bong was leading a mission over the area when his squadron encountered overwhelming numbers of Japanese fighters. Outnumbered and outgunned, Bong did what he did best. He attacked. He weaved through enemy formations, taking out multiple aircraft in daring close-range passes. His P-38 Lightning danced through the sky, evading fire while delivering devastating blows. Even with flak and enemy bullets filling the air, he continued to engage, ensuring the American bombers and naval forces had the cover they needed. By the end of the day, Bong had scored his 40th kill, a record no other US pilot would ever surpass. With his tally now at 40, General Douglas MacArthur personally awarded Bong the Medal of Honor in December 1944. But with his fame growing, the US military made a controversial decision. They grounded him. Bong's skill was undeniable, but the brass knew that every day he flew was a risk they couldn't afford. Losing America's top ace to a routine mission would be a morale disaster, so they reassigned him to stateside duties, promoting him to test pilot for the new P-80 Shooting Star jet fighter. Unfortunately, Bong's career was cut short in the most unexpected way. On August 6, 1945, the same day the atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, Bong was killed when his P-80 malfunctioned during a test flight in California. He was just 24 years old. Despite surviving hundreds of deadly dogfights, it was mechanical failure, not combat, that claimed the life of America's greatest ace. Richard Bong remains one of the most iconic figures in US aviation history. His Medal of Honor, along with his other decorations, is displayed at the Richard Bong's Veteran Historical Center in Wisconsin. The Bong Bridge and Bong Air Force Base, which was never completed, were named in his honor. His P-38 Lightning, famously decorated with a pinup of his fiancée, Marge, is one of the most recognized aircraft of World War II. Even today, no American fighter pilot has ever matched his 40-kill record. Hiroyoshi Nishizawa, Imperial Japanese Navy, October 1944. By October 1944, the skies over the Philippines were a battleground of fire and metal. The United States, having launched its campaign to liberate the islands, was sending massive formations of bombers and carrier-based fighters to crush the last remnants of Japan's once dominant air force. But one pilot, Hiroyoshi Nishizawa, Japan's ace of aces, refused to go down without a fight. With an estimated 87 confirmed kills, Nishizawa was the most feared and skilled pilot in the Imperial Japanese Navy. In the chaos of the Philippine campaign, he once again proved his dominance, taking down multiple American bombers in an aerial battle that showcased his legendary precision and aggression. Yet despite surviving countless dogfights, he didn't meet his end in combat. Just days later, he was killed in a transport plane, his death as strange and ironic as his legend. Born in 1916 in Nagano Prefecture, Nishizawa showed no signs early on that he would become one of Japan's greatest warriors. He was quiet, introspective, and almost frail-looking, hardly the image of a fighter pilot. But what he lacked in physical strength, he made up for with an intense, burning focus. He joined the Imperial Japanese Navy Air Service in 1936, excelling in flight school and proving himself a natural in the cockpit. His peers noticed something different about him. He wasn't just skilled, he was obsessed with mastering the art of aerial combat. When the Pacific War began, Nishizawa was assigned to Tainan Air Group, flying the Mitsubishi A6M0, a plane that dominated the skies in the early years of the war. It didn't take long for his legend to grow. In February 1942, during the invasion of the Dutch East Indies, Nishizawa shot down his first enemy aircraft. By mid-1942, he was part of the elite unit led by Saburō Sakai, and together, they tore through Allied squadrons, racking up victories at an astonishing rate. His flying style was precise, aggressive, and almost acrobatic. His fellow pilots called him the Devil because of his seemingly supernatural ability to appear out of nowhere, strike with deadly accuracy, and vanish before his enemies knew what hit them. By October 1944, Japan's air power was in desperate decline. The once invincible Zero was now being outclassed by the newer, faster, and heavily armed American aircraft. The US was bringing overwhelming numbers, better trained pilots, and superior technology into the fight. But Nishizawa was still lethal. During the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944, he and his unit had already faced impossible odds, and now, in October, they were once again thrown into the fire. The Americans had begun heavy bombing raids targeting Japanese airfields, supply lines, and infrastructure. Nishizawa knew that every mission could be his last, yet he still led attack after attack against waves of enemy bombers and fighters. On October 24, 1944, Nishizawa participated in a furious air battle against the formation of US B-24 Liberators and escorting fighters. Despite the overwhelming American firepower, he managed to destroy several bombers using his signature hit-and-run attacks. but he knew Japan's position was becoming hopeless. That night, he made a chilling request. He asked his commanders to allow him to fly a kamikaze mission. He believed that if he couldn't turn the tide in dogfights, then he would sacrifice himself for the Empire. His request was denied. Instead, he was ordered to fly escort missions for kamikaze squadrons attacking the US fleet. Even as Japan resorted to suicide tactics, their greatest living ace was too valuable to throw away in a single strike. Just 2 days later, on October 26, 1944, Nishizawa was ordered to fly to Balakat airfield in the Philippines to retrieve new aircraft. But instead of flying himself, he was placed aboard a transport plane, an unarmed Nakajima Ki-49. As the transport flew over the Philippines, it was intercepted by American F-6F Hellcats. The slow, defenseless transport was no match for the US fighters, and it was quickly shot down over the island of Mindoro. There was no dogfight, no final blaze of glory, no chance to fight back. Japan's greatest fighter ace, the man who had survived countless aerial battles, who had personally shot down dozens of American aircraft, and who had just days earlier begged to die in a kamikaze attack, was killed without firing a single shot. After Nishizawa's death, his reputation faded into mystery. Unlike German aces such as Erich Hartmann or Soviet heroes like Ivan Kozhedub, Japan kept no official centralized records of individual aerial victories. His final kill count is estimated at 87 confirmed victories, but some sources claim it could have been well over 100. Despite this, his impact on Japan's air war cannot be overstated. He fought from the very beginning of the war nearly its very end, and his ability to adapt, survive, and dominate the skies made him a symbol of Japan's elite fighter corps. His death, however, was a cruel irony. The man who had lived and thrived in dogfights was shot down in a transport plane, unable to fight back. Would he have gone down in a blaze of glory if given the choice? Most likely, but fate denied him that. Instead, his story ended in a way no one expected, leaving behind a legacy of skill, courage, and tragic irony. Thomas McGuire, USA, December 1944. By December 1944, Major Thomas B. McGuire Jr. was a legend in the skies. With 38 confirmed aerial victories, he was just 2 kills away from tying Richard Bong as the United States' top fighter ace of World War II. McGuire was aggressive, precise, and fiercely protective of his men. But in the early hours of January 7th, 1945, that same protective instinct would cost him his life. In a desperate attempt to save a fellow pilot, McGuire pushed his P-38 Lightning beyond its limits, stalled out, and crashed, bringing his incredible career to a tragic end. Born in New Jersey in 1920, McGuire had always been fascinated by flight. He joined the US Army Air Forces in 1941, training on various aircraft before being assigned to the P-38 Lightning in the Pacific Theater. Unlike Bong, who was known for his aggressive, close-range tactics, McGuire was a calculated marksman. His flying style was methodical and precise, relying on positioning and superior gunnery skills rather than reckless dogfighting. By late 1944, he had become one of America's most feared and respected fighter pilots, achieving back-to-back multiple kill missions and earning the Distinguished Service Cross and Silver Star for his exploits. But McGuire wasn't just a lone wolf ace. He was a leader, and his concern for his squadron would ultimately lead to his downfall. On Christmas Day 1944, McGuire and his squadron were on patrol over Luzon, the Philippines, where US forces were battling to take the island from the Japanese. In a span of 2 days, McGuire shot down 4 enemy aircraft, bringing his tally to 38 confirmed kills, just 2 shy of tying Bong's record. But on the morning of January 7th, the mission took a deadly turn. McGuire and his flight engaged a group of Japanese Ki-43 Oscar fighters. His wingman, Captain Edwin Weaver, was suddenly in trouble. An enemy aircraft was on his tail, closing in for the kill. McGuire, unwilling to let his fellow pilot go down, did something every fighter pilot is trained to never do. He ignored his altitude, airspeed, and position in the heat of the moment. Determined to get a shot on the enemy fighter, McGuire made a hard left turn while still carrying his auxiliary fuel tanks, a move that drastically reduced his maneuverability. He then pulled up sharply, trying to gain an advantage, but he'd slowed down too much. His P-38 Lightning stalled out, flipped, inverted, and plunged into the ground before he had a chance to recover. McGuire was killed instantly. His death was a devastating loss to the US Army Air Forces. He was only 24 years old, so close to breaking the record and so close to the end of the war, yet gone in an instant. For his heroism and relentless dedication, McGuire was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor, the nation's highest military decoration. The citation praised his extraordinary leadership, courage, and selfless attempt to save a fellow pilot. In his honor, the McGuire Air Force Base, now Joint Base McGuire-Dix Lakehurst in New Jersey, was named after him. His P-38 Lightning Pudgy 5, named after his wife, remains one of the most recognized aircraft of the war. Though he died just 2 kills shy of the record, McGuire's calculated style, incredible marksmanship, and leadership made him one of the most respected fighter racers in American history. His story is a powerful reminder of both the skill and sacrifice of World War II's greatest pilots. Would you have risked it all to save a friend? Thomas McGuire did, and it cost him everything. By February 1945, the Eastern Front was collapsing around Nazi Germany. The Red Army was pushing west, smashing through everything in its path. Soviet tanks, numbering in the thousands, rolled forward like an unstoppable tide. But there was one man the Soviets feared above all others. Not a fighter ace, not a general, but a Stuka pilot. His name was Hans-Ulrich Rudel, and he was the most destructive combat pilot in history. With over 500 confirmed tank kills, multiple aircraft shot down, and thousands of enemy vehicles and artillery pieces destroyed, Rudel had become a one-man wrecking crew. Even as Germany crumbled, he kept flying, kept killing, kept defying the odds. And on February 8, 1945, he did it again, leading another attack, destroying Soviet tanks and engaging enemy aircraft in a battle that should have killed him. Rudel was not born a natural pilot. In fact, during his early training with the Luftwaffe, he was considered mediocre at best. He was slow to learn, lacked aggression, and showed no signs of the killer instinct required of an ace. But what he lacked in raw talent, he made up for with pure, relentless determination. He trained harder than anyone else, pushing himself past his limits. When the war began, he was assigned to fly the Junkers Ju-87 Stuka, a dive bomber that was becoming obsolete in the face of modern air combat. Most Stuka pilots were easy prey for enemy fighters, but Rudel was different. He just refused to die. He became an expert at low-level attack runs, developing a near supernatural ability to destroy tanks with his 37mm Bordkanone cannons. His reputation exploded in 1941 when he single-handedly sank the Soviet battleship Murat with a precision bomb strike, a feat no other dive bomber pilot ever matched. From that point on, his missions became legendary. By early 1945, Rudel had already survived multiple crashes, been shot down dozens of times, and even escaped behind enemy lines. He'd been wounded, frozen, starved, but he always returned to the fight. On February 8th, while leading yet another attack against Soviet forces, he and his wingmen spotted a formation of Soviet tanks and trucks moving west. With Soviet Yak-9 fighters patrolling overhead, any normal pilot would have pulled back, knowing an attack would have been near suicidal. But Rudel wasn't a normal pilot. He dove straight in, flying dangerously low over the battlefield, lining up his cannons on a column of T-34 tanks. His first pass sent one tank into a fireball of twisted metal. His second and third passes knocked out several more. Soviet anti-aircraft fire lit up the sky, but he kept attacking. Then, disaster struck. A Soviet 40mm anti-aircraft shell tore through his plane, shattering his right leg. Blood poured into the cockpit. He was barely conscious, his leg mangled beyond recognition, but he somehow managed to pull his aircraft back toward friendly lines. Rather than bailing out, he landed his crippled Stuka and was immediately rushed to a field hospital. There, doctors amputated his leg below the knee. For any other pilot, this would have been the end, but not for Rudel. A month later, with an artificial leg, he was back in the cockpit, fighting again. By the time the war ended, Rudel had flown over 2,530 combat missions, a number unmatched by any other pilot. His final tally included 519 confirmed tank kills, 800 plus military vehicles destroyed, 150 artillery pieces eliminated, 9 aircraft shot down in air-to-air combat, a Soviet battleship and multiple bridges, trains and supply depots obliterated. His relentless service earned him Germany's highest military honor, the Knight's Cross. In the final days of the war, he continued to lead attacks against Soviet forces, refusing to surrender until Germany officially collapsed in May 1945. After the war, Rudel was captured by American forces and interrogated extensively. Unlike many high-ranking Luftwaffe officers, he showed no remorse for his role in Nazi Germany and remained a staunch nationalist, which made him a controversial figure. Despite this, his military achievements were undeniable. The US military studied his combat records, and even Cold War-era strategists analyzed his methods for tank-busting airstrikes. His revolutionary close air support tactics influenced modern attack aircraft like the A-10 Warthog, a plane specifically designed for tank killing, much like Rudel's Stuka with 37mm cannons. Hans-Ulrich Rudel was not a fighter ace in the traditional sense. He wasn't a glamorous dogfighter like Erich Hartmann or a tactical genius like Alexander Pokryshkin. He was something else entirely. A pilot who refused to die, a relentless attacker who pushed his machine to the limits, and a man who fought through injuries that should have ended his career many times. He was the deadliest ground attack pilot of World War II, and to the Soviet tank crews who faced him, he was a nightmare that never stopped coming. Even with one leg, even with his country collapsing, he kept fighting. Ivan Kozhedub, USSR, April 1945. By April 1945, Ivan Kozhedub was already a legend. With dozens of aerial victories, he was the top Allied fighter ace of World War II, flying for the Soviet Air Force. He had fought in some of the most brutal air battles of the Eastern Front, facing off against the Luftwaffe's best pilots. But in April 1945, just weeks before the war ended, Kozhedub did something unheard of. He engaged and shot down a German Messerschmitt Me-262 jet while flying his propeller-driven Lavochkin La-7. In an era where jet fighters were considered untouchable, Kozhedub proved that skill, experience, and raw determination still ruled the skies. Born in Ukraine in 1920, Kozhedub grew up fascinated by aviation. He joined the Soviet Air Force in 1940, but when Germany launched Operation Barbarossa in 1941, he was initially held back from combat due to inexperience. That changed in 1943 when he was assigned to the 240th Fighter Aviation Regiment, flying the Lavochkin La-5. Kozhedub's first combat missions were brutal. The Luftwaffe controlled the skies and many Soviet pilots barely survived their first few dogfights. But Kozhedub quickly mastered aerial combat, using the La-5's speed and firepower to dismantle German formations. By 1944, he had switched to the Lavochkin La-7, an even deadlier aircraft, and his kill count skyrocketed. By the end of the war, he had 64 confirmed aerial victories, making him the highest scoring Allied fighter ace of World War II. As the Red Army closed in on Berlin, the Luftwaffe deployed its last desperate weapon, the Messerschmitt Me-262, the world's first operational jet fighter. These aircraft were much faster than any Soviet or Allied propeller-driven plane, and their speed allowed them to hit and run before enemy pilots could react. But Kozhedub wasn't an ordinary pilot. In April 1945, while patrolling near Frankfurt, Kozhedub spotted a pair of Me-262s preparing to attack Soviet bombers. Instead of avoiding the jets, he went straight after them. As one Me-262 made a high-speed pass, Kozhedub used his experience and superior positioning to anticipate the jet's movement. He waited for the right moment, then opened fire with his LA-7's powerful cannons. A direct hit. The Me-262 exploded in midair, sending debris spiraling to the ground. The second jet, realizing the danger, fled the battlefield at full speed. Kozhedub had just done the impossible. He shot down a jet fighter in a propeller-driven aircraft. By the end of World War II, Kozhedub had flown 330 combat missions and engaged in 120 dogfights, emerging victorious 64 times. No other Allied pilot, American, British, or Soviet, surpassed his tally. He was awarded the Hero of the Soviet Union 3 times, the highest honor in the USSR. After the war, Kozhedub continued flying, training Soviet pilots during the Cold War, and later rising to the rank of Marshal of Aviation. Ivan Kozhedub's aerial mastery, fearless tactics, and ability to adapt to any situation made him one of the greatest fighter pilots of all time. While many considered the Me-262 invincible, he proved that skill could still triumph over technology. Would you have had the courage to take on a jet fighter in a prop plane? Let us know all that and more in the comment section below. And as always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you learned something new.